It's Victory Tuesday. What an awesome win last night on Monday Night Football. Beating the Eagles at home in SoFi. What a gritty game by the Chargers to grind out a win against the Eagles. The defense last night was phenomenal. Justin Herbert did not have his best game, but when his best was needed, he delivered. Now, the Chargers right now sit at 9-4 after that win last night. They're only two games out of first place. So it's going to get down to the wire. I don't think Denver's going to run the table. I don't know if the Chargers will, but with how poorly that offensive line played yesterday, receivers couldn't get any separation. Yet Herbert finds a way to get the Chargers down the field, get them into field goal range, put points on the board, tie that game up, put up points in overtime, and then that defense, which played phenomenal last night, sealed the deal for the Chargers. So we're going to go through the recap of the game. I'm going to go through my initial thoughts from last night. We'll go through the full box score, and then we'll go through some PFF grades and then talk about playoff implications from this game and talk a little bit about next Sunday's matchup against Kansas City. If you haven't already, be sure to like, subscribe to Lectures Podcast on YouTube. You can also listen on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Also, follow me on socials. I am at Electric Edge Pod. And before I get into this episode, I do want to mention that I will put out a vlog for this game as well. I had an amazing day yesterday at SoFi. So grateful. I had met Antonio Gates, and he was at the Hyundai booth, and I got his autograph, and they upgraded my tickets. So, like I mentioned, I normally sit up in the 500s. I got upgraded yesterday to club seats. Really so emotional, really grateful. And I talk a little bit about my journey yesterday. Wasn't feeling the best. My knee was really swollen. I thought I was gonna have issues walking around yesterday. And I touch on that. I have some bad knees, unfortunately. But I was very emotional, super grateful for to the Chargers and Hyundai for, having something like that for fans. And it was a great overall night yesterday at SoFi. So with that being said, got a lot to go through in this episode, a lot to talk about the good, talk about the bad, and talk about looking ahead. So without further ado, let's get into this episode. All right, so the Chargers took care of business on primetime last night, 5-0 in primetime this year, beating the Eagles 22-19 in overtime. Tony Jefferson sealing the deal in overtime with that pick of Hurts. Hurts threw 4 picks last night, very uncharacteristic of him based on his stats this year. I did mention on my last episode, on my Bolt Blast, that I thought the Chargers defense would get a pick on him. I was about 3 short. So, great defensive effort yesterday by the Chargers. They had Deshaun hand drop in coverage and get a pick. So, masterful defensive game plan by Jesse Minter yesterday. But this was a statement win. I talked a little bit about my last episode, the point spread. It was between 1.5, 2.5 points. ESPN Analytics had the Eagles as the favorite. And for most of the night, it was come from behind from the Eagles. The Chargers put up that early touchdown. Then there's a lot of trading back and forth field goals. Chargers defense got a lot of stops, whether it was picks. You had that pick, fumble recovery. The defense, I can't talk enough about how well that defense performed last night. But they forced 5 turnovers on Jalen Hurts, which is just extremely uncharacteristic of him in that offense. So, it's a statement win on primetime. The whole country's watching. And the Chargers put themselves in a position to make the playoffs. They're still sitting at the 5 seed with that win last night. They're 9-4 on the year. It's a non-conference win, so it won't really affect anything as far as seeding for them with that win. But 9-4, if they had lost that game last night, they would have dropped out of playoff contention. So the grit, determination, all the adjectives above were displayed on that field last night with the Chargers. And let's talk about Herbert real quick. So Herbert, by no stretch of the imagination, had his best game. Dude's coming off hand surgery. I think yesterday was a week that he had surgery. And he's stiff-arming dudes with his left hand, trying to pick up the first down. The passing game just was not there. I think the one play that really inflated his passing yards was that little toss to Kamani Vidal and him going down the field to about the 20. I think that was a 60-yard catch. But receivers couldn't get anything going yesterday. A couple passes to Keenan Allen on 3rd down. And we'll go through that full box score here in a bit. But Herbert used his legs when he needed to. He was under immense pressure yesterday. He was pressured in 68% of his dropbacks. I think he had 27 pressures yesterday and 7 sacks. And the dude still found a way to will the Chargers to get points on the board and put him in a position to win. I mean, the numbers, if you looked at the box score, you would think, dude, he sucks. But the numbers don't reflect on how clutch he was last night. He came through in the big moments, another fourth quarter. I wouldn't say comeback, but he got the Chargers into field goal range to tie that game up as the fourth quarter expired. Just grit, tough play by Herbert last night. And, I hope that a lot of the criticism that he gets week to week goes away. I know it won't because they'll just look at the box score and rip that apart, but you can't say it was a pretty game on either side for both the Eagles and Chargers offensively last night. Want to talk about someone who I've mentioned on this episode plenty of times, Donte Jackson. Donte Jackson with another pick last night. Tony Jefferson with another pick last night. I mean, Tony Jefferson's pick was the pick to seal the game. Clutch. I think both of them have 4 picks on the year, but what a steal of a free agent signing of Donte Jackson. And to think that Tony Jefferson retired, came back, and he's performing at the level he is right now is just incredible. I think, one, obviously you could attribute that to work ethic, but two, I attribute that to the culture that the Chargers have built in that locker room, especially on the defensive side of the ball. I feel like everyone in that secondary is a ball hawk. I mean, you had Cam Hart with a pick last night. You had Donte Jackson, Tony Jefferson, and then drop in Deshaun Hand in coverage, and he gets a pick. Wild. But like I said, the Chargers defense last night came to play. They made a statement, and you could say what you want about Herbert using his legs, but the reason why the Chargers hung in that game was because of that defense last night. All right, let's switch gears a little bit, and let's just talk about the bad. Right, the offensive line last night was bad. I can't tell you how many times I saw, I think it was Nakobe Dean or some other linebacker, just blow through the A gap and light up Herbert. And one time he fumbled. I mean, Becton had a terrible PFF score in game, and it got adjusted post game, and I'll talk about that here in a little bit. But they did not do a good job last night adjusting pressure through the A gap, especially when your quarterback has one hand. You would think that we have to do our best to keep him upright, and the Eagles just brought it all night. And just skimming through some PFF grades, and like I said, we'll go over them here in a little bit. Jamaree Salyer, another great game. Trevor Penning has come in on those run packages and has played very well. But once again, it's the same song and dance with Mekhi Becton, Bradley Bozeman. Ray Pipkins went down, so Bobby Hart had to come in last night. It's the same stuff that we've talked about week after week with this offensive line. And, it's not going to get better. It's not going to change. The Chargers are winning, but you got a quarterback with one hand right now. You have to find ways to not put him in a position where he can further get hurt, and then you're out of playoff contention. Because you don't have Herbert, you're not winning a game. And for the people who say, oh, Trey Lance is not winning that game either. Let's be serious. But just to touch on this, so Mekhi Becton had 8 pressures yesterday, and he gave up a sack. Bobby Hart had 8. Jamaree Salyer had 5. Zion Johnson had 3. Bradley Bozeman 2. Omarion Hampton 1, and Kamani Vidal 1. It was 28 total pressures, and the pressure rate was 63.4%. There was a stat that came out that Herbert has been sacked more than 6 times in 3 games in his career. In all 3 of those games, he's 3-0. So I don't want to hear about he's not clutch. Oh, we make excuses for him. The dude's performing at a high level with nothing in front of him. So that conversation needs to end by all the critics of Justin Herbert and the Chargers. Another point I want to talk about is, and I've talked about this plenty of episodes, it's literally, and I can go back and check the stats, but I am pretty sure it's literally every other week, Justin Herbert is the lead rusher for the Chargers. He was the lead rusher for the Chargers last night with a bad hand that he's stiff-arming Cooper DeJean with. I'm struggling to understand why the Chargers can't find consistency in this run game. Hampton was back last night. Hampton was running well. Hampton scored a touchdown. Kamani Vidal looked good. I feel like they're so quick to abandon the run if they get, 1 or 2 yards on first down. When they brought in the extra offensive lineman, when Penning was in, and I think they had Matlock in and Disley, like the run game got 5 or 6 yards. Herbert also took snaps under center last night. So I don't know what adjustments need to be made, but it's literally every other week that Herbert is the leading rusher on this team. And I'll have to pull up the updated rushing totals after last night's game. But he's probably close to the leading rusher on this team, which is nuts. But just another checkbox in his favor that, Without him, this team would not be 9-4 in the position it's in right now. Like I mentioned, Hampton was back last night. He looked good. He had a touchdown on that play action pass. I think like the Chargers were at the 2-yard line and walked in. He looked good. Vidal got the start last night. He looked good, but it's just extremely inconsistent. So my hope going into Kansas City is we can get back on track and find some consistency in the run game. Let's talk about Dicker. Cam Dicker, I think, was 5 for 5 last night in field goals. Clutch. And to think that the Eagles cut him, I think he was on the Rams practice squad too, or he played with the Rams. They didn't want him. Ends up on the Chargers, and he has been as clutch as they come. And Charger fans, we know of how long we've had some kicking woes for, but it's such a breath of fresh air to have a kicker that you know can take care of business when the game is on the line. Cam Dicker needs to go to the Pro Bowl this year. I can't wait for the Charger social media team to put out their ads for Cam Dicker to the Pro Bowl. It's going to be epic this year. You know, as I flew back home last night, I was sitting on the plane thinking about the game and going through X and all the news coming out of the game. And it really hit me that if this game was under any other coaching staff, if this was Staley, if this was Anthony Lynn, if this was Norv Turner, if this was Mike McCoy, this team would have lost. They would have gotten blown out of the building. The dam would have broken in the third quarter, and that would have been it. But Harbaugh and this coaching staff, now I have my gripes. I've made them very clear on this show, but Harbaugh and this coaching staff, they would not allow that to happen in this type of game. And Charger fans, we've seen it time and time again. They're in a close game. There's a pick, there's a fumble, something happens, and they lose the game. But coaching matters. The toughness, the will to win, the grit that Harbaugh and this coaching staff has instilled in this organization, sometimes it gets overlooked. And it's a game like this where you're reminded that this is why we brought in Harbaugh. And this is why he has the coaching staff he does in place. I mean, Minter's game plan last night was phenomenal. Phenomenal. You know, and it proved my point. I wouldn't say proved my point, but it validated my point to an extent that Hurts is a system quarterback. He needs to have the right situation in order to function. He was down a couple offensive linemen last night. They were giving the ball to 𝐸𝐵𝐾. 𝐸𝐵𝐾 had over 100 yards rushing. Some errant throws to A.J. Brown. I mean, he had 4 picks. Kind of proves my point that Hurts may be a little overrated. And I was talking to a friend this morning who's an Eagles fan, and he was telling me that Philly radio is just tearing Hurts and the Eagles apart right now. So I can only imagine what they're saying. I think they're ready. I think the Eagles fan base and Philly fan radio is ready to move on from Hurts, which is astonishing considering they just won a Super Bowl last year. But let the Eagles have their problems. We have our problems. And, you know, we can't worry about other teams' problems because, well, we have an offensive line full of problems in front of us. Now, the other piece of this that I want to talk about is you have a statement win, primetime, against defending Super Bowl champions. You beat both teams that went to the Super Bowl last year this season. Beat Kansas City week 1, beat the Eagles last night. Are the Chargers for real or not? I'm not sold they are. What I will say is that the last stretch of games are going to determine what kind of team this is. Now, my hope is that this win last night is a momentum builder. You play Kansas City next week. Let's put Kansas City out of their misery, take care of business, go to 10-4. You got to go on the road again to Dallas. I don't know about that game. And we're still a couple weeks away and things can change. But that's a game the Chargers can win. Then you come back home and you play Houston. Houston's defense is firing on all cylinders. And then your last game of the year is against Denver. I don't think Denver's going to win out. I don't think Denver is going to finish with two losses on the year. Denver plays the Packers Sunday. I don't think Denver's going to win that game. So can this team take last night's win, get on a roll, get into a position where Week 18 matters to win the division? I think it's a really, really far stretch, but it's definitely not out of the question. I don't think Bo Nix is that good. That defense runs that team. I just don't think they're going to have the momentum to keep winning these one-score games. I really don't. I know they have to play the Packers. I know they have to play Jacksonville. So they have some tough opponents coming up too. I just don't see how they finish with 2 losses this year. But I could be wrong. But I think this AFC West can get very interesting in this last stretch of the season, and we'll see about that. Okay, let's look at the box score from last night, since I always like to go through stats and just talk about what I saw from a fan sitting at the game last night, and then go through the actual stats. Jalen Hurts last night was 21 of 40, 240 passing yards, 4 picks, took 1 sack. 𝐻𝐻 got the sack on him. QBR of 27.3 and a rating of 31.2. 𝐃𝐨𝐧'𝐭, 20 carries for 122 yards, averaged 6.1 yards a carry. He had 1 touchdown. He had that long touchdown run where they did the fake tush push and he went right around the edge and scored a touchdown. A.J. Brown was the leading receiver for Philly last night. He had 6 catches for 100 yards. Dallas Goedert, 8 catches for 78 yards. Devonta Smith, 4 for 37. Darius Cooper, 1 for 19. Jahan Dotson, 1 for 3. And Shipley also had a catch for 3 yards. As far as the Philly defense, I mean, their defense played phenomenal last night. Cooper DeJean was just all over the place. He played really good coverage against Ladd last night. Ladd couldn't get anything going. Like I said, a grip performance by, I would say, that Eagles defense, extremely gritty performance. But Chargers found a way to win. Let's talk about Charger stats. So Herbert, 12 of 26, 139 yards passing, 1 touchdown, 1 pick. That pick was a tip ball. He had 7 sacks, QBR of 33, and a rating of 59.6. He had 10 carries for 66 yards. Hampton had 13 carries for 56 yards. Kamani Vidal, 14 carries for 44 yards. And Vidal led all receivers with 60 yards receiving last night. Keenan Allen was 3 for 22. Trey Harris, 1 of 18. 𝐿𝐵𝐿𝐿, 1 catch for 12 yards. Hampton, 2 for 11. QJ, 2 for 8. Gadsden, 1 for 7. And Disley with 1 catch for a yard. Fumbles last night. Like I said, Herbert fumbled twice. He recovered, or Matlock recovered 1. 1 was lost. And then, like I mentioned, 𝐻𝐻 had the 1 sack for the Chargers last night. Also to note that last night's game, Darius Davis did get hurt on one of the, I think it was a punt return. So Vidal and Haskins took the bulk of kickoffs and punts last night once he went down. And then as far as the picks, like I said, Cam Hart had a pick, Deshaun Hand had a pick, Dante Jackson had a pick, and Tony Jefferson had a pick. All right, let's switch over to PFF grades here. Another great game by Salyer. His grade was 76.2, and he was second at 71. Will Disley at 66.9. That's due to his pass blocking and run block. Ion Johnson at 60.4, and Kamani Vidal at 60.2. Ty Beckham, once again, bottom of the barrel, 31.8. His pass block grade was a 13.7. Atrocious. Gadsden, 43.3. Bobby Hart, 44.6. Justin Herbert at 45.4. He had a really good run grade, though, at 70.8. And then Trey Pipkins, 47.8. It's never good when 3 of your offensive linemen are in the bottom 5. Let's switch over to the defensive side of the ball. Dante Jackson, 91.6. What a steal. What a steal he's been. Troy Dye, another great game by him, 81.9. Odafe Oweh at 78.4. He had a great pass rush grade. Jamari Caldwell at 78.2 and Khalil Mack at 75.1. Much better graded game for the Chargers defense. Elijah Molden is at the bottom at 46. I know he left the game with an injury. Deshaun Hand at 47.7. Teair Tart, 48.6. Bud Dupree at 51.1. And Otito Ogbonnia at 52. Derwin James had a very good game last night. Tarheeb Still, I thought, did a really good job as well. He did a good job covering A.J. Brown. Cam Hart has kind of middle of the pack, some lower grades on tackling and run defense, but in the pass game, he played very well last night. And that's why I mentioned, and I've mentioned this many times, PFF is just one piece of the puzzle. I do want to take a look at Philly's grades here, and that's what I wanted to see. Cooper DeJean at 85.7. I thought he was the best defensive player on the field last night for the Eagles. Let's take a look real quick at Philly's offense. Will Shipley was the number 1 graded player last night, 75.1. Dallas Goedert at 72.2. He had a good game last night. A.J. Brown, Brett Toth, which is their center, and Fred Johnson, their right tackle. And Jalen Hurts finished towards the bottom at 18. Since we went over high level of stats last night, I didn't go through any film today. It's been kind of a crazy day. I got home last night just around 1 a.m. Unfortunately, I had to leave the game earlier, so I was going to miss my flight back home, and I was not driving in the middle of the night back home. So I didn't get to see them tie the game. I had the game on in the car, trying to get back to the rental center. So I saw them with the overtime pick as I was dropping my car off. So I knew if I stayed any longer, I would start hitting traffic, and then I didn't think I was going to make my flight. So if you have any suggestions on how to maneuver night games without staying over a night in LA and getting back to LAX in light speed, please let me know. I will take all advice. But I do want to touch on real quick, since there were some significant playoff implications if the Chargers won or lost last night, what that looks like right now. So the Chargers sit in the 5 seed right now. Right now, their playoff probability is 76%. So they're in the driver's seat right now. Bolt fam, want to get in on the action on game day? Prize Picks is the easiest way to play fantasy style picks. No leagues, no drafts. Just pick more or less on your favorite player stats and you're live. New users get $50 in lineups when you play your first $5 using code ELECEDGE, ELECEDGE. Quick, fun, and perfect for game day. Sign up today with Prize Picks. Eagles, with that loss last night, they're still in the 3 seed. They're 8-5. They're first in their division. They got a 93% chance of making the playoffs. But Chargers in the 5 seed. Like I said, they can put the Chiefs out of their misery next week. Chiefs are 6-7. They have 11% chance of making the playoffs. If the Chiefs lose last week, I think it drops to like 1%. So make it happen next week. Take care of business. Go to 10-4. You're in a great position to have a really good seeding and potentially win the division at some point. It's not over till it's over. And since we're on the topic, some other news. The Colts are out of the playoff picture right now, but the Colts did sign 44-year-old Phillip Rivers to the practice squad today. I think Charger fans may lose their mind if there's a playoff situation where it's the Colts and the Chargers had to face off. Man, Phillip Rivers deserves a ring, but I don't know if I want it at the expense of the Chargers. But that is an interesting situation developing in Indianapolis. Phillip Rivers hasn't played since 2020, so don't know what football shape he's in. But I did see that he coaches his son in high school, and they run the same offense as the Colts do. So he's still very familiar with it. So it'll be interesting to see if they do elevate him from the practice squad to the active roster. And if they do, Phillip Rivers is no longer eligible for the Hall of Fame. So he will have to get re-put on the list 5 years from 2025. Just interesting stuff today. But there's no predictions, at least on NFL.com yet, as if the Chargers win on Sunday and what their playoff odds look like. So we'll touch on that in my pregame episode leading up to next week's game in Kansas City. But with that being said, I thought it was a very gritty win last night for the Chargers. I wasn't confident in my pregame episode that they were going to win, but yesterday when I got into the Southern California area, I had this, sense of calm, and I was having breakfast and they had on ESPN, I think First Take was on, and they had something on the banner saying Jim Harbaugh was, I think he was like 6-2 or 7-2 in primetime games or Monday night games. And I said, you know what? I think the Chargers are going to win today. I think someone also replied to me on X, asked what my predictions was, and I did switch. I said 21-17 Chargers. I think they get the win, and they did. So with that being said, I'm not picking against the Chargers the rest of the year. I'm not picking against them. We're gonna run the table. Let me not get too excited, but I'm not gonna pick against them because why should I? This is a Chargers podcast. So, but with that being said, I do try to keep it fair and be critical of the team. If I really do think that they're not gonna win, I will say that, but it's gonna be close. It's going to be a rough stretch, but do I think this team can get it done based on last night's performance? Absolutely. Hopefully Herbert can heal up this week, get the hand in a much better position, and then we'll see what happens down the stretch. But if you haven't already, be sure to like, subscribe to Electric Edge Podcast on YouTube. You can also listen on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Follow me on socials at Electric Edge Pod. Also, be on the lookout this week. Like I said, that vlog is coming from last night's game. Got a ton of cool footage, meeting Antonio Gates, having conversations with him. Super cool. So be sure to check that out. And let me know your thoughts about Monday night's game in the comments, Charger fans. Let me know what you thought went well, what didn't go well, and there's a lot to talk about what didn't go well. But at the end of the day, it's a win in the books. The Chargers are 9-4. They're the 5th seed in the AFC, and we are on to Kansas City. So as always, thank you so much for tuning in. Every single subscriber, follower of the show is really appreciated. And be sure to look out for my pregame episode later this week and also that vlog. So with that being said, go Chargers and bolt up.